An audience, it really is, and not to start off by being muted is fantastic. So, good morning, everyone. My name is Councillor Teddy Fox. I'm the leader of Sheffield City Council, but more importantly, I'm the councillor for Manor Castle Ward. And for those people who know about Manor Castle Ward, it's one of the most deprived wards in the city, and not just for. So it really truly is. And I was just re-elected again in May, and I just want to get the opportunity to personally thank all those people in Manor Castle Ward for having a voice, whether they voted for me or anyone. It is nice to get out and about and speak to people. It's a huge pleasure to be able to welcome you to the Millennium Galleries this morning for the launch of the Race Equality Commission reports. Before we get started, there are a few housekeeping items to run through. Firstly, the fire alarms. Oh, it's so good to say this. We're not expecting any fire alarms, but if there are, can we make our way through the exits, the nearest exit, and congregating in Tudor Square? Secondly, toilets. The toilets are located at the bottom of the escalator near the main entrance, and accessible toilets are at the back of the room. Finally, you should find questions. Questions. On your seat, you should find some forms to fill in, and we ask you if you want to put some questions down, and that we can have a Q&A at the end. And please place your form in the box at the back of the hall during the break. We will make sure that we answer as many questions as possible during the question and answer. The Race Equality Commission was commissioned by the City Council under the leadership of my predecessor, Julie Daw, and my colleague, Councillor Abtisam Mohammed, who will offer her reflections later in this meeting. It was established against the backdrop of the murder of George Floyd and the ensuing Black Lives Matter protests that took place around the world, with a remit to assess the nature, causes and impacts of racial inequality in the city and to make recommendations for tackling them. The Commission included people from a wide range of different backgrounds and experiences, and included cross-party representation from the three main parties on the City Council. It took a comprehensive evidence gathering and listening exercise and hearing from many people and organisations over the city. As a result, it is a significant and important report that does not shy away from the deeply troubling issues that I has identified. I always say that I don't walk in anybody else's shoes. I've had a chance to read the report, and some of it is startling, absolutely startling. That by working together as a city, united in a commitment to eradicate the racism and inequality that blights us, we can create a better Sheffield for all of us who live, work, study and visit our city. During the 2 years since the Commission was established, the Council's commitment to its work has been undimmed. Indeed, its importance has, if anything, become more acute and ensured. I have publicly gone on record that we want a fair and inclusive city, and we will not yield from that determination. And the commitment of the Council, and my own personal commitment as leader of the Council, to acting on the findings and recommendations of the Commission is absolute. This morning, the launch is in two parts. Firstly, we'll hear from the Chair, an excellent Chair, I must say, and I've had many times. So, Kevin, thank you, first of all, for being so comradely in our conversations, and as challenging as Kevin can be, let me tell you. We will take through the main findings and recommendations of the report, and then from two of the Commissioners who will then offer their own reflections. Just on the Commissioners, I would want to say a personal thank you for the time and effort that you put in. It is absolutely, truly amazing the way that you conducted yourselves through that. And I'm sure Kevin will say about some of the challenges through the pandemic that did for many people. Following a short break, we will then hear from representatives of some of the bigger organisations in Sheffield who will briefly offer their perspectives on the report and what it means for the city, before finishing with the Q&A session which I spoke about earlier. I'd now like to hand over to Professor Kevin Hylton, the Chair of the Commission, who will take you through the report, the main findings and recommendations of the report. Kevin.
Thank you, Terry. And it's great to see you all. Welcome. Just to double check with you all have a copy of the report and the executive summary. Is that right? Yeah. Okay, hang on. It's like being in the front row of the pictures. I can't see this thing behind me. Okay. So if you, I'm guessing you have an executive summary because there was one on your chairs. There's also a copy of the full report at the table at the back where you registered. So can you just make sure you grab one, or whilst I'm speaking, you can sneak off and grab one if you're fast enough. But they are here, and I've got to say I've seen only an electronic copy of this. Hi, Adil. It's just really strange seeing people who I've only seen on a screen for a while. Of course, at the start of this process, COVID hit, and so the whole of the planning and the implementation of this Race Equality Commission was done online. In fact, the first informal meeting we had was at Sadaka, when we realised how tall or how dark or how light or how long our hair was or short it was. Many of the commissioners said, "I thought you were more handsome," but then I took that in the spirit it was intended, I think. But nevertheless, if you have now a copy of the executive summary and the full report, I would urge you to take some time and read through the full report, because often people will have a look at the executive summary and have a look at the recommendations without fully understanding the ramifications of what we have read, what we've heard, that have led us to the findings that were the basis then for the recommendations. The report will be is being worked up into an infographic. It's also being worked up into a 3-minute explainer. And if you need to know more about the Race Equality Commission, the hearings and other documentary materials, then there's a web link at the back of the report, and I'm just double checking the executive summary. So if you want to if you are having trouble sleeping this evening, you might want to turn on one of the hearings and just allow that to take you off. But the hearings, the recorded hearings, will be available. Adele, are they available now, or but they're available now? Okay, so there you go. Just to give you a sense of the shape of the report, it's fundamentally broken down into 4 parts. There's a chapter 1, which is the background to the report. So there's an outline of the demographics of the city, changes in the city, some links with migration and changes and so forth. And we recognise that with the census data coming out soon, that some of that will need to be tweaked in the electronic copy. But this is where we are at the moment. We're using the latest data that we have in terms of demographics, and also there are some reflections on what we have learned from past race reports and why it's important for us not to repeat any of the issues or any things that have been missed in the past. So there have been some reflections on past reports that have been in the city, but also past reports that we've all read and heard about nationally. The second chapter presents findings. The first lot of findings are thematic. The thing is, as we were going through the hearings, and as I was listening and reading, and similarly with the commissioners, there were certain things that were coming up at time and again, and so rather than becoming repetitive, there was a sense of a need to cluster some of those key themes, so that we could see that these are issues regardless of the 6 areas that we focused on. So that, and I'll talk a bit about those findings shortly. So the second chapter is thematic, or generic if you like, but we've used the term thematic. Then there's the third chapter is shorter, but that focuses on 4 specific areas, because the data and the evidence that emerged in relation to them didn't quite fit that all of the cases in terms of the 6 areas. And then, of course, we come to the recommendations, and I'll talk a bit about the recommendations. So fundamentally, that's the shape. The executive summary outlines what I've just said in a concise way, but have a look at the detail, read the detail, understand the detail of the report. And I'm very happy, and this is the reason why I've put my my email address up here. I'm very happy to speak to individuals and organisations post-reading. I think it's important again to say that post-reading, because it might be that you need me to shed more light on what something might mean for you as an individual or organisation. But it should be clear, because the thematic findings have emerged from a process of triangulation that is robust and rigorous. But then again, I would say that I'm a researcher. So that's a bit about the shape. There's going to be different formats, and of course I recognise that when you're writing for different audiences, the different formats will appeal to different audiences. Okay, so I'd like, Terry started this off, but I'd like to come in on the back of that, just to acknowledge all of those who, from the beginning, have worked tirelessly to support this project. So I've got to start off with the commissioners, and a number of the commissioners are here. Could I just ask any commissioner in the room to stand up? Just, sorry, I don't mean to embarrass you. So I've got a couple here who are sitting down, because you can see them, of course. I just wonder if we could get just a short round of applause for our commissioners. So thank you again, commissioners. We have some of the secretariat team here who have worked to do any number of things in the background, from getting attendees onto Zoom calls, getting them off mute, putting them back on mute, and what have you, and just ensuring that various bits of paperwork are in the right places. I wonder if the secretariat could just take a stand. Any of the secretariat here? Come on, I can see you, Adil. So you need to stand up. Are you not willing to okay. Okay. There were a few at the back there. There were a few at the back that you didn't see, but they stood up. So thank you very much. And I guarantee you there are lots of other people that haven't been acknowledged. But I try to, and commissioners have tried to nudge me to say, don't forget, because some people spoke to me informally. took time out just to get in touch and talk to me and give me a sense of what Sheffield's about, what their experience has been. And I have to say that when I had a phone call from Abtisam to ask if I would be interested in becoming the independent chair, I was sceptical because, of course, as Terry was saying, this was around the time of, around the kind of height of a lot of the Black Lives Matter activity, and I noticed quite a lot of superficial activity going on nationally and internationally, and in some ways, some people getting in touch with me to kind of endorse some of that tokenism, and I wasn't interested. But at the same time, I've also been invited to speak at various organisations where I know in those organisations and in those cities there's already the expertise in place, but they've been ignored and they've come to me. So clearly there are organisational issues that they've not dealt with, because I know that there are good people in those cities, there are good people in those organisations, but they're being ignored. Now, from that point of view, I have had some contact with people in Sheffield, and I know that there's a lot of expertise and a lot of commitment in Sheffield. So I wanted to get that ball rolling, and I'm a bit of a professor by portfolio, so I take on projects. And this initially was supposed to be a year's project, but because of COVID and a number of other things, extended to 2. It's a really, really emotive area that we've dealt with here, and I recognise that. And even up to yesterday, I have had people contact me as chair of the Race Equality Commission to do something about things that are happening to them or to people that they're close to in their personal lives and their professional lives. So there are still clearly issues in Sheffield, because people are still getting in touch with me directly. I've had a number of anonymous meetings because, and we write about this in the report, because people still feel apprehensive about openly talking about these issues for fear of being victimised. We had some closed hearings for similar sorts of professional reasons. And there are still, and again, one of the findings is around trust and confidence. There are still long-term trust issues in terms of community relations in the city. The voluntary community and faith sector is particularly undervalued and fragmented, and are often made to compete against each other for scarce resources. This comes out clearly again in the report, but these were things that became clear to me quite early on. Initially, I had conversations with commissioners. We met and we spoke, and I was trying to get a sense of who they are and what their experiences were, and so on. So I had a hint of that, and then things were borne out later on. And then there's a constant frustration, and I expect there's still a frustration in the room that we've even needed to do this piece of work to get this objective proof that racism is an issue in this city, as opposed to any other city where it's a problem, and that racial disparities exist within the city. So these are just some of my immediate reflections I wanted to share with you. But I also wanted to share with you. Sorry, I'm just getting pinged here, and I thought I'd take my thing off silent. Okay. So it's important just to share with you the terms of reference for the Commission, because again, people are still getting in touch with me because they feel that I can get involved in live cases or incidents that have occurred, and it's not the remit of the Commission, but it speaks to issues that still need to be resolved in the city. So from the point of view of managing expectations, even in this room, it's important to recognise some of the things that Terry was saying about the nature and extent and impact of racism and racial disparities, you know, to invite written evidence, to hear oral evidence, to consider that evidence, to report on it, to focus on the 6 priority areas: business and employment, health, civic life and communities, crime and justice, sport and culture, and education. They were our starting points, and some other areas came to the fore, like housing, for example. And then, and I think Abdissam is going to speak to this, we had conversations around legacy, around what happens next in terms of, so there was a working group to talk about the legacy and sustainability element of the project, and I believe Abdissam is going to speak to those things. So I'm conscious that there have been times where there's been a bit of mission creep. So occasionally I've had to try to keep folks, so I'm not purely talking about commissioners, but people beyond the commission, just to keep people on message and to manage expectations. So just a question for you. So imagine we didn't have an independent chair, 24 commissioners, 12 days of hearings with a lot of work that went into those hearings through working groups, 165 attendees, and that's a conservative estimate, 165 attendees at the hearings, over 150 pieces of evidence, over 400,000 words of transcripts, multiple reports and related documents, and a legacy working group. Imagine we didn't have that. Imagine there wasn't and the researchers in the room will be wincing when I talk about en vivo in terms of qualitative data analysis process and triangulation of hearings data, evidence and reports. And imagine we didn't have that analysis go on. Would we be any worse off? Would we be any worse off had we not done those things? For me, we wouldn't be any worse off if we hadn't done this commission. Okay? Because the key is, what do we do next? If we only sit on this report and we don't do the doing, then Sheffield is in trouble, because it would have spent a lot of time writing this report, gathering the data, gathering the evidence, and not acting upon it. So everything we've done, if that's not acted upon, then it wouldn't have been worth us spending the time on this. And I've been at this point with a range of organisations recently. So the Royal Yachting Association of all, imagine the issues around kind of race with the Royal Yachting Association, and the issues around with the ECB and Yorkshire Cricket. Okay, and there are lots of other examples that I can draw on, but I think about those 2 examples because the Royal Yachting Association, it came to me because it had issues around, it still has issues around diversity, but we're immediately open to wanting to lead at the highest level and for the culture of the organisation and the structure of the organisation to change, to become more inclusive. It didn't need to spend a year to 2 in gathering the proof. because it already knew what the issues were and it already knew what it didn't know. Okay, so they then moved forwards in an agile fashion. A bigger piece of work was done for the England and Wales Cricket Board and the Yorkshire Cricket Partnership that fed into the South Asian community, South Asian Asians and Cricket Action Plan in 2015. And I don't need to tell you what's been happening with Yorkshire Cricket and the ECB over the last year or so with Azim Rafiq and so on and so forth. Now, this goes back to what I was saying. It's one thing receiving reports, receiving data, but unless you act upon it, then you will be found out down the line. So the temptation to prevaricate, seek further confirmation of what you know, talking around issues and just doing and redoing the document means you're not doing what I said before, doing the doing. And that's what, this is a conversation I was having with Jonathan only a few weeks ago as we were talking about his doctorate that he's nearly written up, by the way, everyone. But what Sheffield has now is a shared narrative, okay? You all have this shared narrative as a starting point. Organisations have this shared narrative as a starting point and can talk about some of the big headline themes for the city, and in some cases can talk about specific themes for particular professions. So consider the questions. What does the REC report mean for you as an organisation, and how can you make the necessary changes to demonstrate success? What does success look like for you? Now, the report itself is, in particular in that thematic section, draws on narratives from the hearings and narratives from evidence that weave together a strong story that leads you to very clear conclusions. And by stories, I don't mean just made up fictional stuff. This is real world stuff. But the voices of people from Sheffield can be heard in this report. And we draw on that, we draw some conclusions, and we build on those issues in the recommendations. And you'll see that shortly. We have, to make it easy to speak about the report, you can talk about 7 recommendations. It doesn't sound like very much, but there are 39 detailed action points. So for each of those action points, there are kind of sub-points. But you can talk immediately about 7 recommendations and 39 action points. What are they? Familiarise yourselves with them. These are the report finding headlines. Austerity, Black Lives Matter, and COVID have often been, well, are or have been the backdrop to reasons why things have or haven't happened in the city. And you will get a sense of how they have influenced the dynamic in the community by, when you read the report. They are reasons, as I say, reasons why, reasons offered for why things have become constrained, or why there in some cases have been a reaction to needing to do things. And you can get that just from a matter-of-fact thinking around austerity and Black Lives Matter. And of course, COVID and that backdrop was the backdrop to a number of conversations in the hearings. Racism and inequalities, reporting grievances and disciplinaries, anti-racism, data and research, consultation and co-production, funding, procurement and enterprise, workforce diversity and leadership, board membership and governance, trust and confidence. Now, the trust and confidence is almost a distilling down of some of the issues that have come from the previous findings. And then there's for specific findings that focus on crime and justice, police, education, health and housing. So they're the findings. I'd like you to just familiarise yourself with them. Okay. And I think stakeholders in Sheffield will relate to the 10 findings, but each one will have different amounts and types of work to do for each organisation and each individual. And some of you, and you will all be working at different rates to achieve the necessary change or success. So from my experience of working with local authorities, representative bodies and national governing organisations, what I see is a lack of reflexivity. And by that I mean, what are we doing before we then tell other people what they should be doing? I see a lack of that need for introspection, that need for to bring in critical friends, to offer you a 360 on who you are and what you do before you then start looking at what's happening out there and trying to change what's going on out there. So I see a lack of that reflexivity in organisations and critical reflection about what systems need to be put in place to facilitate progressive change. Can the established system or people that brought these organisations up short in some cases, take the organisation to the next level as policymakers and practitioners? So is that expertise there? Is that racial literacy there? Is there that cultural competence within the organisation to take these ideas forward strategically and in policy terms? So there needs to be that consideration. I'm going to, if I have
8 minutes.
Okay. Okay, so I'm just going to show you. You have these in the report. Okay, so these are examples of the kind of narrative-rich aspect of the report. So I'm just going to show you 3 indicative narratives from the report. One is in relation to consultation and co-production. So collecting the views of BAME people or offering them a temporary seat at our table is not co-production. So this isn't coming from us, this is coming from the voices in the hearings. Co-production means that BAME people, and can I just say that there is a section early on in the report around terminology, so we won't get distracted on terminology at this point. So co-production means that BAME people have power in all aspects of the cycle of decision-making and change, from co-design through to co-delivery, co-evaluation and co-governance. So we are learning, I'm hoping that we are learning, you are learning as a city, from the expertise of other voices, because they are being shared in this report. So that's just an indicative narrative from consultation and co-production. And then you'll see, when you read, how they knit together. The next one on funding and procurement, it's funding, procurement and enterprise. Funding structures and processes often exclude smaller groups and charities, which hits BAME organisations particularly hard. There is a conundrum around having capacity to be actively engaged in emerging partnerships and invest in bid writing and service development. Many organisations cannot afford to invest in income generation, given the commensurate risk of being unsuccessful. This perpetuates the more dominant position of better established, very often white-led organisations. So we're not just looking at racism, we're looking at racial disparities as well. But also where good practice has been identified, you'll see those at the end of each of the findings. Thank you. Leadership and governance. The lack of diversity in leadership across every major institution and system across our city is striking. The most fundamental issue impacting on structural racism is that the major systems we all rely on, for example, education, health, housing, are designed primarily by white people for white people without due consideration of the impact on non-white citizens. One clear manifestation of racial inequality is in strategic leadership and governance. Governing bodies, partnership boards, and other key groups and committees are often made up of all white members. The role of these strategic bodies is recognised as being very important in setting agendas, shaping services, making funding decisions, and setting up opportunities. In drawing on a narrow range of experiences and perceptions relative to the breadth of those who live in the city, they therefore often do not take into account the needs of the Black, Asian, and minoritized ethnic communities. That was unexpected but very welcome, thank you. So if I can just move on to the recommendations, I have had a warning and I'm going to try to keep to time. There are 7 recommendations, as I said before. The first recommendation is an overarching recommendation, because the other 6 relate to the 6 areas broadly to the 6 areas that the Commission focused on. So within that first overarching recommendation, there's a focus on transparent and measurable targets. This is around consistency, quality, accountability, and transparency. Educating and developing leaders and employees is about designing out racism and racial disparities. To empower and involve employees from underrepresented groups, that's broadly around engaging staff, their ideas, and providing safe spaces for those ideas to flourish. I've mentioned already in one of the narratives the issues around governing bodies and city partnerships, and the need to improve diversity around governance in Sheffield is imperative, but also in terms of senior leadership. The legacy delivery activity, Abdisam's going to talk about that, but these 5 action points in this recommendation permeate the other 6. Now, well, I don't need to show you where it is in the report. You've got a copy of the report. So the other 6 recommendations, which again have their own detailed action points. Recommendation 2 is educating future generations and showing leadership in our educational institutions. 3, the recommendation 3, inclusive, healthy communities, well-being and longevity for all. Recommendation 4, One Sheffield in community life, inclusion, cohesion and confidence. Recommendation 5, celebrating Sheffield through sport and culture, past, present and future. Recommendation 6, proportionality and equity in crime and justice. Recommendation 7, Sheffield equal and enterprising, supporting Black, Asian and minoritized ethnic business and enterprise. So, we have then asked all organisations, all individuals reading this report to begin their endorsement of this report, but at this starting point. And that is to endorse the Race Equality Commission's recommendations and agree to implement them as a priority. To meet the Commission's criteria for and become an anti-racist organisation. And we talk about what we mean by that in the report. None of this is just left hanging there. So an anti-racist organisation within 24 months of the publication of this report. 3, to join the Race Equality Legacy Body by actively and financially, where possible, or in kind, contributing to its establishment and ongoing work, effectiveness to check and challenge the key stakeholders' implementation of the Commission's recommendations. So the legacy body, again, Absam will talk about this, the legacy work will be checked and challenged and monitored on an annual basis. And last but not least, aim to meet the recommendations of this report in 36 months. So the report is necessarily aspirational, it is realistic, it identifies key stakeholders in the recommendations table, but I think it's important to recognise that the report doesn't limit you to particular aspirations. As individuals, as organisations, use the report as a starting point, use it as a way to develop momentum, but use it also as a way to give the people that you're working with a mandate to express themselves as they move forwards. So I think I've hit that time. So please take the report, read the report. I have to thank commissioners again for their contribution to this report and all those that supported it. And so please, this is yours now. It's the city's. Do your work.
Thank you, Kevin. You kept to time, just 1 minute over, which is really good. So you'll have the opportunity to ask Kevin questions. So as we said at the beginning, there's a question sheet on the back of your agenda. So if you have any questions, please make sure that they're written down and put at the box at the back. So at break time, we can start to collate all the questions. So I just want to thank Professor Kevin Hylton for his hard work, his rigour and his commitment over the last 2 years. We wouldn't be where we are today with the depth of the report that we have. But as Kevin and Terry have said, it's that the chair has compiled all the work, but actually there are 24 commissioners as well that have been involved in the work, in bringing things together as well, and their commitment and support must also be recognised. And I'm going to now bring in two of our commissioners. So Olivier Timo is the first. So Olivier is one of the commissioners, but is also the co-chair of the BCS Leaders Forum. And Olivier is going to offer his reflections on the process in being a commissioner, but also his perspectives on how this will be impacted on the voluntary and community sector as well. So I'll pass on to you, Olivier.
Thank you. Morning all. Can I start by saying solving problem is what we do as human beings. That's what we do best, solving problem. And I want to thank all fellow commissioner and the chair for producing this outstanding piece of work. When I was asked if I will be willing to give 5-minute reflection of my experiences as a commissioner and on the importance of the commission being set up, uncertainty flooded through me. Why? Because I've never felt comfortable talking about race. I am someone who champions human quality. For example, kindness, warmth, honesty in what I do. Allow me to provide you with some background information. On 7th of July 2020, a letter was sent to Councillor Julie Doe and all Sheffield local MP by a group of Sheffield residents as a result of a killing of George Floyd by the Minneapolis police and similar racially related killings in the US, and by the global response to this here in Sheffield by the bigger impact of COVID-19 infection disease on African, Asian, and Arab descendant community as reported by Public Health England, and also debate about decolonizing culture and the curriculum. 5 key questions in that letter was asked to the council. And one of the most important questions was, will the council provide a measurable, rapid improvement plan to demonstrate how they will support the key targeted organization in the city to improve resources for the community after the negative impact of COVID-19 on BAME communities. This gave me an opportunity to thank the following Sheffield residents and the group for the collective effort in coming together to solve problem. I would like to thank Dr. Elaine Waterley-Jones, Dr. Jones, Ruth Cage, Miss Bloch, Miss Dennis, Dr. Abdul Shaif, Adam Youssef, David Basu, Ursula Mary, David Campbell, Dr. Shad Salat, and Mr. Kevin McKelvey. Personally, we need to improve outcome for targeted group. And one way to achieve this is to view the city as a classroom. I'm talking here as a practitioner. And the reason why I say we need to view Sheffield as a classroom is because for a teacher to become an outstanding leader, you need to make sure that all your students, any single child, all your students are making the required progress. And this is where the city has failed for many years. Are we making the required progress? My answer is no. Then we need to look at focus group. And this focus group is how we will demonstrate that we are outstanding leaders. Then I hope the report is exactly what the rapid improvement plan will do. I mean, showing that we will solve this issue by making sure everybody make the required progress. I would like to end on 2 points. I'm calling on key stakeholders, mainly Sheffield City Council, both universities, the NHS, South Yorkshire Police, to make available in coming days a discretionary fund to tackle high priorities recommendation. That's the strict minimum that they can do. From the report, they are high priority. Unless a discretionary fund is made available to act on it, I truly believe we are not going to have a starting point. Most of the time, when asked what piece of wisdom I will give, I always speak to the need of people to think more collectively. Because I always go back as a practitioner of solving problems. We solve problems by acting collectively. We need to constantly ask the question, what is it we can do together? I grew up in the kingdom of Bayangam, that's in Cameroon, where the word Muntu, Bantu, Ubuntu are commonly used. It is the idea that I'm only human if I recognize the humanity of others. I think it is this collective notion of life that we have lost. It's about time we come together. Thank you.
Thank you, Olivia. That was very powerful. I'm now going to pass on to Daljit. So Daljit is also one of the commissioners and is an assistant professor at the Coventry University as well. So off you go, Daljit.
Thank you. And I'll try and stick to time, I promise. It feels great to be a part of this process, but only if we can really make a difference in going forward. My reflection is very much based on past, present and future. From the past, many of the names that have been mentioned today, I was part of that journey as a young person, once upon a time, being an activist on the ground, but also being on the inside as a local authority officer to help bring about change. So it was nice to be wearing two hats and working with the different domains, politically, internally and politically outside, and boy is it complex on the outside, and that still hasn't changed. So the connecting and engaging is crucial, but it's important we do it in an open and honest way, having open conversations where we can be safe to have those open conversations without feeling we need to be politically correct. I think it's important that I say that because the commissioners have worked really hard, different generations involved to help bring about change. I'm a local government servant, I can't help it, it's the way I've worked for many years. So we do need to hold the public sector accountable, but do it in a way where we're working within their frameworks as well as them working in our frameworks from a community perspective. When I joined the Commission, the first thing I did was go back to what I call the founders of Mentoring Me. People like Shaif, Abdul Shaif, I've got Abdul Qayyum, Zaid, and many others sat in the audience today. And even seeing commissioners like Ruth involved, that I was part of when I developed the positive action training programs within the council. So it was nice to see a change in that way. As commissioners, we had to, first of all, learn to trust each other. We had to trust each other, we had to learn from each other, and we had to listen to each other. exactly what we do at a grassroots level. It's not right at the moment because the generations have changed and the journey's not necessarily being passed on around the past reports that have been referred to by Kevin. And Kevin, bless him, has had a lot of push-pull factors from all of us going back to some of those reports and saying, look, this time this is going to be a report that generally makes a change, but through a collaborative approach. Now, to do that, we've shown our commitment as commissioners. Now, we now need to work collectively with the different sectors, recognising where they're at with their journey. And dare I bring in language, because that's current nationally, around, well, what do we say? Do we use the language BEMA? Do we shift to the language minoritised? Or do we change to something completely different? I'm not sure, but I think it's up to us to decide as a city, using the recommendations within the report. And again, that's a crucial thing for us to do. And if we do that, I genuinely believe as commissioners, we can support in helping bring about the change within the political framework, recognising resources are tight everywhere at the moment. So it may be putting collaborative bids in the way we used to in the past, but via the local authority. So I do feel that that is actually crucial in what we say. It's not going to be easy. And even the language within our report is great, it's a good starting point, but we may want to unpick some of that. What does it actually mean? How do we deliver? Who do we hold accountable in moving forward? The themes are great. It's now putting them into practice. But I do feel in order for us to do that, we need to look at a few things. Reflective leadership, what does that look like? Who's going to be reflective? How are we going to hold our leaders accountable? And who is defined as a leader? But in addition to that, I feel we need to look at collaborative change, management, internally and externally. It's sad to see, and it was upsetting for me when I heard some of the evidence, and really disheartening, the experiences that people are going through, which are devastating, and it shouldn't be like that now. We should have moved on, really, and we haven't. And the next generations, we've got to build that trust back with them and say, look, we're different generations involved. We want your involvement, but also recognise it needs funding. And that's where we need to speak, I think, collaboratively and look at a legacy approach to doing that. Whether we like it or not, what's going on nationally is going to have an impact on what we do locally. The levelling up agenda and so on. So what do we do in taking that forward? I'm happy to get involved. I'm happy to do that, but I want to do it in a respectful way, in where we generally are making a difference and we are held accountable. And Kevin, you did a good job. We did a lot of behind the scenes. Well, I'm not happy with this, Kevin. What about this language? What do we do? We're now going to be having that conversation with yourselves. Please work with us to do that. And I do feel if it's led via one infrastructure and get the NHS involved, the police involved, and the universities that work really, really well. A report just recently come out, sadly, yesterday, around the way women are treated in the maternity area. Not good. So you're hearing negative things all the time. Let's, as a city, show we're different and we can make a difference, but from a cohesive and social perspective. And I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Daljit. Okay, so Daljit spoke a little bit there about what will happen next, and really that is the crux of the issues that we have now. I don't think there'll be a single person in the room that will dispute what's in the report. I think the emphasis now is on, well, how do we carry this forward? And the question that I've often had from communities is, well, you know, we know what the issues are. You know, how do we ensure that they're implemented? You know, how do we enforce action? How do we enforce change? And so the reality is it does need a working group going forward. There has been some work that's taken place amongst commissioners. There's been a small working group of individuals who have looked at the possible next steps. So I'm just going to talk you briefly through what will happen now and what will the next step of this process look like. So we are looking to establish a legacy group. So as Kevin said earlier, this is going to be, well, we are hoping for this to be endorsed by all the key anchor organisations. And I think later on we'll hear from the key anchor organisations. So in establishing what this legacy group will look like, we are looking at what does that mean in terms of an operating model. Will it be an informal structure? Will it be a formal body? These discussions are still happening. The membership of the legacy group, so this is going to be an open legacy group, so it's not just for commissioners. So we will be putting out an expression of interest for people who are interested in being on the legacy group. It will be a mixture of individuals who have sat on as commissioners, as well as inviting people from the voluntary and community sector, active individuals in communities as well, who also want to be engaged in the process. So we're going to try and keep this as open as possible. But obviously there are limited places because we need this to be a focused group, because the purpose of this group will be to ensure that we follow through on the actions and make sure that the recommendations in this report are followed through on. And to allow the legacy group to have sort of a functioning process, we need that baseline of information. So the working group will also be looking at, well, what information do we have in terms of data from organisations, in terms of the starting point for the city to be able to say, well, this is where we're going to hold them to account for the next, as Kevin said, 36 months in the initial instance. So the timeline for this legacy group, we are hoping to have something that we can formalise and agree on by the end of September. So there'll be frequent meetings between now until that point, and we can then approach the key anchor organisations in Sheffield to say this is what we hope it will look like. These are the members, and we want your commitment in terms of not just supporting financially or in kind, but actually commitment to reporting to the legacy group and making sure that there's that summary of information and that flow of information that will go through to the legacy group. So as Kevin said, this will initially be 36 months in the first instance, but I think we recognise that change can happen in different ways in the short term. There'll be things that can immediately change, but actually a lot of the institutional issues that we talk about may take longer. So we don't want this to be a short-term project. We are looking for, in the medium term, 5 years for the legacy group to be established for that length of time in the sort of initial term, just so that we can ensure that we can go back to communities annually, every year, and report back on what the summary of the outcomes are. Because I think, one thing that we need to reflect on, and as Olivia and Aljit said, is this came from communities. This came from individuals who were not happy with the constant cycle of, we've done this before, this has always happened, when are we actually going to see tangible change? So the annual commitment of going back to communities and giving that report and saying this is where we are, this is the information that we've received from anchor organisations, this is the change that's happened or not happened, and being able to be accountable to the people of Sheffield in that way, I think is essential for the legacy group. So if anybody is interested in expressing an interest, you can catch me or Adele throughout the day. We'll have an email address that you can send an email to, and we'll give you the information when that comes out. That's not been formulated yet, so I think the working group is still working through this information. So I'm going to end now so we can, right on time, so we can have a break for 15 minutes. This is your opportunity to put through any questions. After the break, we're going to invite the key anchor organisations to give their reflections, but also talk of their commitment to what they will do with the actions, the recommendations in the report. So 15 minutes, back for, is it 15 minutes? 10 minutes, sorry, 11:40. Back in 10 minutes, thank you. Can we start to take our seats? Hello? Can everybody start to take their seats, please? It's going to be difficult bringing people back in, isn't it? Hello?
Yeah.
I think people will start to come round eventually. Can people please start to take the seats?
I'll get the microphone.
Okay. Hello? Hello, everybody, right at the back. Nobody's listening. At the back, a deal. Very slowly. Hello, can everyone start to take the seats? Yeah.
We're a very badly behaved crowd.
I know. Can everybody start to take the seats, please? Nobody wants to sit down. Write the questions. That was hard work, bringing everybody back in. I think I said come and take your seats over 50 times. Right, so the next part is listening to our key anchor organisations. This bit will be very brief because we want to then answer some questions. Some of the Q&As I'll be calling on individuals who have sat down, so we might have some questions for Professor Hylton and other individuals depending on the questions that are being asked. So I'm going to go straight into the response now from the Leader of the Council, Terry Fox.
Thank you, Abby. And thanks, everybody, for that earlier session. I think it really showed, and for Kevin, thank you. When I spoke earlier, I outlined how important this commission is to me personally, but also to the Council and to the City. Although the Council has fully supported the commission from its set up to now, it is vital that it was independent from us, which is what the independent chair and commissioners have enabled it to be, and I want to thank them all for the work over the two years. We know that the final report would probably not be an easy read for the Council, as although we are very committed to tackling inequality across the city, we know we don't always get things right, and at times progress isn't as fast as we would want. But as it says in the report, good intentions are not good enough. It is therefore critical that we and the other city institutions, many of them here today, listen to learn from what people have told the Commission about their experiences of racism and also racial and other inequalities. On my walkabouts around the city, meeting many of you and your organisations, We have heard and discussed those concerns, and it's time for us to offer. And if you get a chance at the end on one of my walkabouts, you need to speak to a deal. He will tell you some of the conversations we had, certainly in Netherthorpe. Also, it is not enough to say that we have listened. We need to take sustained action. For example, we only need to look at our city leaders on the stage today to know that we have to improve the representation in terms of ethnicity, other characteristics, as well as we are to be truly reflective of what is Sheffield. However, I am proud of the fact of our elected youth cabinet is a really diverse representative of young people in our city. I was there with Abby at the count for those young people, and me and Denise met them personally and went on their weekend away. I listened to their concerns, their issues, or what they want and how we can empower them to do that. It really gives hope for the future that passion and enthusiasm that the young people want to bring to the future of this city is just awe-inspiring. But not all issues we have heard about today are visible. We know we have a lot of work to do across the many areas outlined by Professor Hylton. And as a council, we know that the findings touch upon many areas of our work, from education, health, communities, community safety, business, housing, culture, and more importantly, our workforce. So I will work with other members in this room today to develop a plan for the council by the end of this summer, to prioritise the deal with the issues raised for us by this report. Some things will be a lot easier than others to do, and I do not underestimate the challenge in front of us. But the entrenched inequalities, especially at this time, with the cost of living crisis that is facing us and as we recover from COVID. However, we will commit to working together with the commissioners, our partners, to develop the legacy body to enable it to monitor and challenge our actions to tackle the inequalities identified. I personally want to thank our own staff who have supported the Commission through the last 2 years. Finally, we all need to agree to work collectively across the sectors to achieve our best outcomes for the city. We all know we want to live and work and study in a Sheffield that is more inclusive, welcoming, and is actively anti-racist, and the challenges of prejudice and discrimination in all forms. So just go to what Olivia said about the discretionary fund now. I just want to say that councillors are here and Ash is our Chair of Finance Committee, so anybody who wants to speak to Zahira at the front, I'm sure she will engage. But seriously, we want to take our part seriously. I don't believe we should have been here in 2022, but we are. We can only start from where we are at this moment in time. And I think the report should be endorsed by everyone in this city. So thank you.
Thank you, Terry. I'm now going to introduce Kirsten Major on behalf of Sheffield Teaching Hospitals.
Thank you. And I sit here with my formal name badge of Chief Executive of Sheffield Teaching Hospitals, but I'm also the Leeds Chief Executive in the city for our Health and Care Partnership. And we didn't have a long enough table for all of the Health and Care Partner Chief Execs to be here this morning, but absolutely everything I say in terms of our commitment I know is replicated across all of the organisations in the city. The Commission is incredibly important, and the publication of the report is a fantastically important milestone. But it has been a really hard read, and I think what the Commission has done is a fantastic listening and analysis exercise for us that really tells us some uncomfortable truths about Sheffield as a city. I'd like to constantly tweet Sheffield is super, even though my accent is clearly from elsewhere. But this report makes it very clear that Sheffield isn't that super for a lot of people, and we have an obligation to do our part to make that better. So we are incredibly committed of working with the legacy body that is being described and shaped, and want to come together to build an inclusive city and to fight racism in all its guises, in our institutions, in our services and in our city. The privilege of being in the NHS, which I'm incredibly passionate about, is that we get to touch people's lives when it really, really matters. And that is a deep privilege, but also brings massive responsibility that when we get that wrong, it is incredibly important and devastating. And we are all committed to doing that better. I've been Chief Executive of Sheffield Teaching Hospitals for 3 years, and I did bring in a completely new approach to equality, diversity and inclusion in my organisation, and I think it is beginning to bear fruit. But we are absolutely not resting on our laurels, because I think what I've learned in the last 3 years is that big strategic intent really matters. Our leaders need to embrace this agenda, but the operational rigour on a day-to-day basis to make sure that your strategic intent and fine words actually happen in reality is never ending. And just last week, my EDI lead is in the audience, and we were looking at some data about our recruitment practices and came across a bit of data on our healthcare scientists, which are not a massive part of our workforce, but pretty big. And the data was showing that you're twice as likely to be appointed at interview if you're white than if you're not white. Completely news to us. What on earth's going on in there? And we're already doing a deep dive, but it is that day-to-day operational rigour combined with the big strategic commitment, and really want to work with the legacy body to do better and in partnership collaborating with the rest of the city. So thank you.
Thank you, Kirsten. I'm now going to pass on to Dr. Alan Billings, the Police and Crime Commissioner.
Thank you very much, Abdissam. I am, of course, the Police and Crime Commissioner for South Yorkshire, not simply Sheffield, but I'm also a resident of Sheffield, a citizen of Sheffield, so I have a real personal interest in this. And I do believe this is a very significant moment in the history of our city, and I hope that we can seize this moment and really make something of it. So I promise here this morning that I will do everything I can as the Police and Crime Commissioner to look at these recommendations and see how we can best implement these going forward insofar as they impact on police and the wider criminal justice system, and I have a role in that. I know the Chief Constable shares my commitment here as well. She's not here this morning, though we have the District Commander for Sheffield, Chief Superintendent Shelley Helmsley, and we have the Assistant Chief Constable David Hartley here. And as I say, I know the Chief Constable is also committed to make this work. We recognise it is that significant moment for all of us. I think as I read the report, it seemed to me that the commissioners had got exactly right our understanding of what policing is in this country. I think you all realise that in this country, unlike many other parts of the world, policing here is policing by consent. Our police are not routinely armed, for example. They police by consent. But that only works if they have the trust and the confidence of the communities that they serve, have that trust and confidence and maintain it and keep it. And therefore, as our city becomes more diverse, it's very important that, well, two things I think follow from that for policing. One is that our police force itself must increasingly look like the communities that it serves. So it's important for us that we look at the force and see what is the makeup of that force. Is it representative of all our diverse and diversifying communities in South Yorkshire? That's something that we have to look at internally, and there's a challenge to us in the report about that. But equally, it means that the police have to understand that diverse community that Sheffield now is, understand all the groups that make up the community and are sensitive to those differences and are able to respond to them appropriately, respectfully and sensitively. So there's a big amount of work for us to do as a police force in that respect too. I don't think we should assume that we're starting off with a blank sheet of paper, some tabula rasa. That isn't true either. An awful lot is going on already, both at a national level, for very obvious reasons. Nationally, the police have really had to think through a lot of the issues around policing. Nationally, the National Police Chiefs Council, the College of Policing, have drawn up a race action plan, which is being implemented across all forces, including our own in South Yorkshire. So that's happening nationally, and locally we have our own plans and strategies in place as well. Amongst other things, I have an independent ethics panel, for example, who look at things like the diversity of the workforce, stop and search, how that impacts on different parts of our community and so on. So a lot is going on already, and we'll see how what we're doing can be made to work with this plan and dovetail into that. And I would end by saying and echoing what has already been said, that the legacy body is critical. We have to get that up and running, and that has to work for us all, because without that, this report just goes on the shelf and gathers dust, and we do not want that. So I see this, if I can quote some words from, you'll know that as well as Police and Crime Commissioner, I'm also a priest, so if I can draw upon my other profession as well, and quote from the prophet Jeremiah, we're seeking here the welfare of the city, because in its welfare lies our own.
Thank you, Alan. Professor Susan Fitzmaurice of the University of Sheffield.
Thank you very much. How to follow that, but firstly, really to say thank you from the bottom of my heart to the chair, all of the commissioners, and everybody who's given evidence, to have borne witness, really, to their experiences and to have thus contributed to an immense report. It is both encouraging but also very humbling to see Sheffield come together like this to address race equality and to galvanise our organisations and all of our efforts to do so. At the University of Sheffield, we're taking time to reflect on the findings and look very hard at the ways in which we can support and indeed embed recommendations into our own race equality work to ensure that they join up, they don't run in parallel. I'm here because I chair the University of Sheffield's Race Equality Steering Group, and it works to develop an inclusive campus for all of our students and staff. And yet, we are acutely aware that we can only really support race equality by working collaboratively with other organisations, and most importantly, by listening to the experiences of people right across the city and the region. I just want to share very briefly some of the work we've been doing within the university to address race equality. We have a race equality strategy and action plan which we launched in 2019. And key objectives there would not surprise you. They're to build an inclusive campus culture, to widen access for students from all backgrounds, and we know that the thorny bits about language, but BAME students through transition to higher education and to support those students to succeed. To reduce the ethnicity awarding gap, which is absolutely crucial, to improve graduate outcomes, and importantly, to diversify our staff body and to ensure that our staff have access and opportunity and indeed encouragement to be in significant leadership positions. Now, since the publication of that strategy and action plan, we have made some progress, I'm happy to say. We have extended anti-racist training for all of our staff and our students. We are pursuing across the university decolonising the curriculum work. This is not always easy, but staff and students are collaborating very productively in that area. We have equality, diversity and inclusion training for staff and for students, and most recently, staff and students together produced a video series on the history of racism that provides real context and background to our race equality work so that we can disseminate that and engage colleagues and students right across the institution. We're striving to become a university of sanctuary, and we are applying for the Race Equality Charter Bronze Award in 2024. And so this means that we are very busy collecting data from right across the institution for staff and for students, for progression, for recruitment, And so we will be able to support the city in providing that all-important data as we proceed. We know that we've lots more work to do at the university, and we must work collectively to change Sheffield, to change our institutions. So we really look forward to working together to support this work as we go forward. And I'm very excited to learn more about how the legacy group develops and to understand better exactly what the needs and aspirations and desires will be of that group and how our organisation can help. Thank you.
Thank you. And finally, Dr. Sally Jackson of Sheffield Hallam University.
Thank you very much indeed, and I can only echo what my colleagues have said. It is an absolute privilege to be here, an honour, and my huge gratitude to everyone who has thrown themselves so steadfastly into the report. Thank you very much indeed. Sheffield Hallam University recognises the importance of the Commission, really welcomes the report, as I've said, and its aims and ambitions, and it does fervently embrace the collaboration in continuing the work on standing against racism in this tremendous city of ours. Hallam takes its role as a major organisation in Sheffield, as well as a provider of education and term time home for all of our students, very seriously. The recommendations are clear, and we must all work and act together for the greater good. As part of our endeavour in taking all matters relating to equality, diversity and inclusion seriously, I have recently been appointed as the Pro-Vice Chancellor for EDI at Hallam. It's an aspiration, but the vision that I hold for Hallam is to become known as a stellar example of a university that is dedicated to its staff and students, for its cultural diversity, and where all individuals consider that the environment created is one of inclusion. That was something that came through very compellingly in the report. Where people feel that they belong, that they know themselves to be valued, respected and encouraged to participate fully in study, work or recreation. And the importance of diversity in our city, in our communities, is paramount. Our society at Hallam comprises a wide spectrum of people, and we seek to promote and celebrate the differences between us all to enhance and progress our community. And as my colleague Susan has said from the University of Sheffield, we also have a race equality action plan. We are also working towards the Advanced HE race equality plan. We have a substantial body of work which is known as equity accomplices, and there are people here in the audience today who have worked with Hallam on that piece of work, and we're proposing to drive that out further across the city and the region. We have been very fortunate to have already been made a University of Sanctuary, and that work has been, again, a tremendous privilege and honour, and we are working very closely with some Ukrainian colleagues currently. So I am striving for all staff and students to thrive in that inclusive environment. They can feel appreciated for their unique characteristics and contribution, are comfortable in exploring and sharing their ideas, knowing that they can be their true and authentic self, whilst always treating others with dignity and respect. So finally, the report, I believe, represents a really excellent opportunity for us as colleagues to work together for the good of the city and the region. Challenging and constructive though it has been, we must all work together going forward. Hallam is absolutely committed to working with partners to tackle racism and racial disparities so that we have the culture and society in which every individual can succeed and thrive. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'd like to thank all of our partners for speaking today and just emphasise the importance of key anchor organisations being involved in the recommendations and ensuring that we as a city move forward. This can't be done by communities alone, championing or pushing on the agenda. This does require leadership and the leadership of the key anchor organisations in taking us forward. So it's good to hear, and it's welcome to hear that you'll be taking the matter seriously and that you'll be endorsing the legacy group going forward. So that's really welcome to hear. Right, Q&A, so there's a huge amount of questions. I'm going to try and theme these into different areas. There's quite a few for the council and Kevin, just in terms of some of the data. So if we start with you, Kevin, and I'll just try and summarise some of the questions that we have that I think you'll be able to answer. So on Sheffield's cultural sector, why was so much evidence gathered from white-led organisations, given and in sports and culture, and given people's racist and negative experiences at football games, how can we ensure that this is a vehicle for change? Shall I do a few, or do you want to just take quickly each question, or shall I do a few?
How many do you have?
So about three, I think three that I can summarise. I think what I need to say is, because there's a huge amount here, I'm going to have to take a lot of these away, answer them, and then put them on the council website, because there's no way that I'm going to get through all of these. So I'll personally ensure that we make sure that these are on the council website. So if I do a few for you, and then the rest generally are about the voluntary sector and the council's responsibility to ensure fairness in the voluntary sector. Other one, so that was about sports and culture and making sure how do we ensure change. Were there issues with the recording of ethnicity data? And do you have recommended actions around the recording of ethnicity? And finally, we're starting at ground zero, but there's been elements of good practice. How will we ensure that we bring those good practices to the front to be shared across all the sectors?
So the first one was about the narrowness of the
sports and culture. So much evidence gathered from white-led organisations. This was problematic for some people, and people's negative experiences at football games. How can we ensure that this is all a vehicle for change?
Okay, so there are issues with the diversity of organisations in the city. So it was a kind of a logical conclusion that we needed to speak to some of those influential organisations to establish what the processes were, and we can call them racialised processes, that led to this kind of narrowness as you move through into leadership and governance. Now, which organisations were chosen across all of the areas were based on quite a dynamic process, and that process involved commissioners in working groups talking about who they felt we needed to speak to, and it was accepted that we needed to get that breadth of individuals, community organisations, kind of key stakeholders, anchor. I know the term anchor organisation grates with some people, but key stakeholder organisations. So we tried to get a breadth. Now, in some cases, and it comes through in the report, there were clearly issues around ethnic diversity in particular sectors. So we couldn't avoid some of the things that were seen as a limitation in terms of ethnicity within the organisations we spoke to. But it was part of, as I say, it was part of a process of consultation, conversation, and prioritisation as to who we spoke to, and also when we received evidence, we could and we invited people based on their evidence. Then that was the group that we had to choose from. So if we, I mentioned earlier, if we receive around 150 plus pieces of evidence, and we find that we particularly want to dig down into, say, half of them, then we can't. It's a challenge then to get some sort of balance in terms of, intersections of ethnicity and gender and disability and sexuality and so on and so forth. A real challenge. And of course, we're always challenged around time and resources and so on and so forth. So I don't know who asked that question, but I think what I'm giving you a sense of is how dynamic and I suppose essentially imperfect the process kind of had to be, because we have 24 commissioners plus me, and then we have the evidence that we then have to sift through before we make decisions who we speak to. So I'm just giving you a sense of a process that didn't necessarily lead to a nicely balanced, even set of attendees at the hearings. The next question
was around
was
the issues of recording ethnicity data. Do you recommend any actions around the recording of ethnicity? We found huge issues and gaps in the recording of ethnicity data.
Well, data collection across the city was problematic, and so there's a lot of good practice nationally around data collection. There's always going to be issues around how people are identified, and Olivia was hinting at this earlier. How people are identified and how they want to be identified. So there's always going to be that tension around data collection. But if you don't have any data collection, you've got to start somewhere. And in some cases, there wasn't that sense of what wasn't known, or where there was a lack of rigor in how data was collected. So depending on who we were talking to, we were having different sorts of conversations around data collection, organisation, and use. It remains a big problem in the city. The quality and consistency of collection of data, and as Kirsten was saying earlier, she did some data collection, found some things out as a result of that, and then acted upon it. That example is an example that you'll see right across the city once people start to systematically gather data. So not just a one-off thing, but systematically gather it and systematically use it and share it and so on. So do I have some suggestions? That there are lots of ways to go about this, but I don't think we have the time to get into the different ways that ethnicity data can be collected. But there are lots of good sources of ethnicity data, and we should be at least turning to some of those. And we mention in the report the online ethnicity data that was made available through Theresa May's racial. I can't remember the exact name of it, but race audit. So there's data like that. The census data is about to come out, so you'll get a sense of how the city's changed over the last 10 years. So there is a starting point for data, but then you also need to know within your organisations who are your customers, who are your staff. How are they progressing through progressing and achieving through your organisation? So it's not just about knowing about the demographics of the city. It's also about understanding what you're looking for in terms of the demographics of your own organisation. So there are different tools to gather ethnicity data depending on what it is you're looking at, and there's quite a lot of available reports and literature available, but you have to know that you need to look for it in the first place.
Thank you. There was one more about good practice, but I think we can do that one in writing because I really want to get to the voluntary sector organisations.
Yeah, there are examples of good practice in the report.
There are.
Thank you. Where they were identified. So where they were identified, we've shared them with you. We're not limited to those examples of good practice. There are lots more in the world, but but we did identify the ones that we felt it was necessary to share, and they're at the end of each of the 10 thematic findings where available.
Thank you, Kevin.
Okay.
The next group of questions, I'm not going to read out each question, but are generally about funding the voluntary and community sector organisations, and how, once the budget has been set for this next year, how are we going to ensure that there are going to be changes that reflect fairness in funding allocation, given that the budget's been set, and how we ensure that some of the recommendations are met as well, given that the budget's been set. So I think that one's for you, Terry.
Thanks, Abby. And the question, the answer is, I don't know. And I don't say that lightly. I really don't. The City Council is facing a budget deficit that Councillor Zayden is and co-chairing of an 18 million deficit. We only just managed to get a balanced budget through last year. We are working through a new system in a committee style, which is a cross-party way of working. We continually to lobby government through our MPs, and Paul Bonfield's here today, who constantly are lobbying to address that deficit. We know there are real measures out there of a cost of living crisis, and some of you were on a call yesterday where we are treating this as an emergency, because that's what it is. It's affecting people here and now. But that doesn't take away from the work of other members and other council members that are in the audience today. We've got the leaders, Douglas Johnson and Shafak. We've got Raouf Marouf in there. We've got Abdul Qayyum in there, who are working tirelessly to try and get ourselves into a situation. But this city voted for a committee system now, and that will sit now with the communities committee. And we will be working through that. On my walkabout that I talked earlier about, where we visited all the wards in the city, we visited many voluntary organisations who put forward their real issues, their constraints, the frustration that some of it is targeted funding, so that can only go where, the pressures of running the buildings that they're in, and there's many out there, and we've had a conversation just today with Olivia, the real pressures on these organisations just getting funding to run the buildings. But what we do know is that we couldn't operate this city without the voluntary organisations. And we've got to do everything we possibly can, even in this crisis, with inflation running at unbelievable figures at this moment in time, that we've got to do to make sure that those organisations that deliver on that doorstep. And that's why we put in the intervention prevention, because we believe capturing it early on a person's journey is a lot cheaper in some respects, but it's more effective than it is at the end of a person's journey and the cost of failure down that line. So we are focusing the finance subgroup and the strategy and resource. I'm coming out with all council jargon now, aren't I? But we are totally focused on not only delivering within the budget constraints, but also for the immediate issues. And that's why I've said to officers here and now that we get an improvement plan in place now, and that's why we need to work with members to get this plan of how we deliver these recommendations. And Sonia quite rightly said to me, highlight the headings on some of these pages, because they're what the crucial issues are. So we'll be working at pace. Just because we're in a committee does not mean to say that we only meet in September. It means that we'll be working hard over the summer to deliver that. But we will also be looking at how we kind of help and support those voluntary organisations. We've got the Director of the Communities at the back, don't show. We've got the Equalities officers in the room as well. So we are acutely aware, and we talk on many times through our equality partnerships that we're working with many organisations. But we are acutely aware. But navigating this real issue of finance and this cost of living crisis, I have to say, I and my fellow members have never ever faced such a cliff edge as we are facing right now. And it is here and now. It's at this moment in time we know families are absolutely struggling. In fact, I don't know how some of them are surviving, to be brutally honest with you. So without our voluntary organisations, we cannot allow them to fall over. We can't allow our social services to fall over. So when I say I don't know, I seriously don't know how we are dealing with this, with our officers, with members and our policies of constantly trying to get order. I know that's a start warning, but that's how it is in our communities right now. I was speaking to Gulnez earlier on about the issues in hers, and Abdul about we act how we are. So we really have to make sure that that pound that we spend is spent in the right place, on the right problems, and dealing with that. And that's where we need to get to. So I'm sorry it's as stark as that, but that is the reality in our communities right now.
Thank you, Terry. So there are lots of questions regarding legacy and what happens next and how can people get involved. So there were a number of individuals that came to me during the break. I don't want this just to be a case of, well, we'll catch you now and can we be on that group? We will put out a call requesting expressions of interest just to make sure that this is open and as transparent as possible. Individuals will be encouraged to take part, but then there will be a process where people are appointed on once the legacy structure is finalised. So on that point, I'd like to thank everybody, all of our key anchor organisation leaders on the panel today, the chair, Professor Kevin Hylton, for his work over the last 2 years. All 24 commissioners, thank you for all of your hard work and support that you've committed over the last 2 years. But most importantly, everybody that's given evidence as well over the course of the 2 years as well, through the hearings, whether that's been in public or in private. Giving evidence has been an emotional journey for some individuals, and the content in the report, when you get to listening to some of the stories, is really powerful. So I'd encourage you all to try and read as much of those stories because it allows you to understand how we've got to the recommendations. So a big thank you to everybody, and thank you for coming today, and you will hear from us on the next steps. Thank you.